Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of 15 Minutes of Fame. I'm Al Gilbert, the Chief Listening Officer for AdvisoryOptions.net. Today, we explore some of the history of Pan American World Airways, better known as Pan Am. My guest today is Dan Colussy, former President and Chief Operating Officer of Pan Am. Mr. Colussy worked for Pan Am from 1970 to 1980. Recruited from TWA, Dan moved quickly through the ranks from Vice President of Marketing, Senior Vice President of Marketing, Executive Vice President of Marketing and Services, and then in 1978, elected by the Board of Directors as President and Chief Operating Officer. In 1980, he resigned from Pan Am to pursue other interests in aviation, satellite communication, and venture fund investing. Dan Colussy, welcome to your 15 Minutes of Fame.
Thank you. Just to clarify my tenure, I resigned at the end of 1980, so I had 11 years at Pan Am.
All right, good.
Through 80.
Excellent. Okay, so let's start in 1970. You came on board to Pan Am the same year that Pan Am introduced the game-changing 747, the commercial aviation. So Pan Am was the first international carrier. I believe TWA was the second. How long did Pan Am have the marketing advantage of the 747 before other foreign flag carriers from Europe and Asia could compete with their own 747s?
It didn't last too long, unfortunately, even though we were the first to order it and really kicked off the whole 747 program with Boeing. The 747 was originally designed as an Air Force cargo airplane. Competing with the C-5, and they lost that. They decided to build a commercial version, which our then chairman and founder, Juan Tripp, that intrigued him. And in fact, I followed his common practice of always buying the first and the fastest and the biggest airplanes, which he had done pretty much through the history of Pan Am and been very successful at it. The delays that happened between the ordering of the airplanes and the actual delivery of airplanes, we were the first ones to get them. But a huge amount of, I don't know the actual number, but a very large number of 747s were ordered by airlines around the world. The U.S. domestic carriers didn't order many of them, but the foreign flags, much worldwide, were the major ones. Put in very heavy orders, and so we had a temporary advantage. I think the first 10 or 12 airplanes were solely to Pan Am, but then they started to be delivered. We ordered 25 initially, followed by another order of 8 for 33 of the original 747-100s airplanes. We ordered some subsequent 747s later on, the special performance SP 747s.
So would you say you had maybe a couple of years, 70 to 72?
No, it wasn't that long.
Okay.
It was months. Okay, that when others began to get them, TWA got them quickly, and then the foreign flag started to get them. And we were intermixed with that as we get later deliveries. But we certainly got credit for the development of the 747, and we were certainly the first one. So it was an advantage, but it was not that long-lived because, and then of course, so many airlines bought the 747s that there became an overcapacity situation worldwide. Because as I've commented before, the decade of the 70s was a recession-prone 10 years. The history is, I think, well known.
Yeah. Well, let me.
That made it difficult because there were just too many airline seats, but the 747 was widely accepted, and really advancement in the whole state of the art of airliners.
Yeah, no, it was. Let me interject. So the Pan Am Museum Foundation, based in Garden City, New York, recently published a very comprehensive interview with you, which I encourage our audience to listen to. Just go to thepanamuseum.org and click on podcasts. And the museum also has a very large YouTube library of TV advertisements of Pan Am from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So Dan, during your tenure as marketing director in the 70s, it appears that the majority of the ads, TV and print, were built around the 747. Is that true perception or not?
Yes, that would be a reasonable statement. Yes, definitely. Because
And
it's a
that
very
was
popular airplane, and we were, we had a special position in the 747. So yes, that's would be a legitimate
okay.
statement.
I want to talk about some taglines. Pan Am Marketing had some iconic taglines. I don't know if you invented them or your ad agency did. So I'm thinking 1966, the world's most experienced airline. 1969, Pan Am makes the going great. 1970s, America's airline to the world. Now, Pan Am founder Juan Trippe always considered Pan Am as the United States flag carrier. Unfortunately, the U.S. government never awarded Pan Am that distinction. Was the tagline "America's airline to the world" the marketing campaign? Was that the embodiment of the Juan Trippe spirit?
Yes, of course, and that was the world's most experienced airline just got a little old. Okay, that had been used for I don't know how many years, but decades. Okay, so it was certainly a good slogan when it was introduced, but we felt, but once we got going in the 70s, that we needed to freshen that up, and that's why we came up. By the way, I see the Pan Am logo behind you, and we had to freshen that up as well. That was there's subtleties you make to the to your logo, which we did to keep it current.
Uh-huh. When did that logo sort of come online? Do you remember, or was it before you arrived, or
I would say in the early 70s, right?
in the early 70s?
We changed the typeface and a few other very subtle things to keep it current.
Yeah. Okay. So between 1970 and 1973, Pan Am brought online, as you indicated, perhaps more 747s than it could reasonably fill. And then in 1973, we get hit with the Arab oil embargo, followed by a deep recession, ignited by very high inflation. Pan Am lost millions and millions of dollars. But then starting in 1977, things turned around. And in 1978, the year I was hired, Pan Am actually turned a reasonable profit.
No, that was
About
a
that
record
time,
profit. That was a
a
record
record profit.
That was my first year as president, so I take credit for that, of course.
Well, then you rightly you should. Now, about that time, I think 77 to 78, Pan Am ran a TV ad that I clearly remember. And to this day, I maintain that this is the ad that filled the seats in the 747s, and all those 747s for at least a couple of years. The ad is titled Two Heritages. Let's take a look, and then I'll ask you to comment. 1 second.
Right.
In America, there are millions of Italians who've never seen Italy, and Poles who've never seen Poland, and Japanese who've never seen Japan, and Englishmen, and Latins, and Scandinavians who've never seen those places. And that's kind of a shame. Every American has two heritages. Pan Am would like to help you discover the other one.
Yes, I was very much involved in that. I'm of Italian heritage, and I was kind of sensitive to this area, and it turned out to be a very successful strategy because it did, remind people where they came from and their need to go back and really explore their heritage. And it did hit a sensitive spot, and you said it earlier. It was a very successful campaign because it hit the right note with a lot of people who weren't really considering international travel.
Yeah, no,
reminded of their heritage and said, "Yeah, they're right. I've never been back to see where my grandparents came from or whatever." And it turned out to be a very good campaign. Yes.
Yeah. What I think made this ad so successful is that unlike all the other traditional 747 ads, it did not speak to the selling points of the unique 747 aircraft or the great service on board or any particular international destination. Instead, it spoke to the core value of going home. So I'm Norwegian American, you're Italian American, my wife is Polish American. I think this really resonated with the public during troubled times.
I certainly agreed with that, yes.
So speaking of troubled times, let's talk about international terrorism. What started out as relatively innocent diversions to Cuba in the late 60s quickly evolved into horrific episodes of aircraft destruction and deaths in the 70s. How did you balance a marketing campaign of business and leisure travel against the fear of airline terrorism? And I imagine you didn't air any TV commercials during the hours of the evening news.
No, it was, we had to be careful there, of course, but I would say that we managed generally to avoid any really downturns because of terrorism, even though we certainly had our share of it. I think, I don't know whether you heard this before, but the most humorous act we had on a hijacking was on our flights to our 747 flights to Rio out of New York. We had 2 or 3 occasions they were hijacked to Havana. And these were just Cuban, refugees who wanted to get back home. It was harmless. So they landed in Havana, and usually you take, you dump the hijacker off, and he'd be happy to be home in Cuba. And maybe an hour or so we'd leave, and wasn't too bad. So one time, about the 3rd time this happened, the aircraft was stuck there for about 4 hours. So I finally started to say, "What's happening down there? Why isn't that plane being released?" That's what had happened in a couple of previous occasions. And it turns out that Castro had never seen a 747. So he called us, "Don't let it leave until I get there." So he went to the airport, and the captain showed him around, and he thought, "Hey, this is great," and so forth. He left. "Okay, you can go now." So after about a 4-hour delay, we resumed our flight to Rio. I'm just giving you one of the lighter sides of the terrorism thing.
Yeah, no, yeah, that is great. But as the ads were being scheduled by your agencies, were they cognizant of what time of the evening to air them and not air them?
Oh, sure, that's right. Of course, we advertised all over the world, of course, and we ran ads in multiple languages, and all the major countries that we served.
Yeah, I've seen some of those ads. Yeah, I've seen them in French, German, and Japanese, Spanish.
Yeah.
Going back to terrorism for a second. So as part of the theme of America's airline to the world, all Pan Am 747s carried a large and distinctive image of the American flag on the tail. The name Pan Am was already well known to terrorists as an American brand, but did anyone on the executive floors of the Pan Am building consider that the American flag was kind of like a red cape to a bull, and perhaps would be a good idea to either remove the flag or remove a smaller version to a less visible part of the aircraft?
No, not at all, because I think that was a real symbol to a lot of people. I've heard dozens of times from letters from passengers that would say that, lived in a country, for some foreign country, and it was so great for them to get back onto a Pan Am airplane because they now felt they were back in the United States. And that was a real plus for us with, especially with US nationals that had been abroad a long time. And to them, it was like coming home, okay, getting on a Pan Am plane with our, US speaking flight attendants and all the American niceties you would find. So no, we were always proud to have that flag on the tail, and I never considered producing it.
Okay, your comment reminds me of I think it was back in the 80s. Fortune magazine did probably one of many articles of Pan Am, and I think it was about the Pan Am comeback. And one of my reservation colleagues was interviewed for that, and he said something very poignant, I think, relative to what you just said. He said at the end of the article, Pan Am's brand and image is such that if the apocalypse of the world were known and people were overseas, they would call Pan Am to go home.
Mhm.
So.
That's right. No, I think the only, we had, the US government passed a Fly American requirement for government employees as well, but that would be mostly, State Department, but other agencies that were overseas, they had to fly US carriers, that not only Pan Am, but it could be TWA or whoever, but that was frankly a little bit of a negative to a lot of the State Department people, because the foreign flags always treated them, very special. Of course, we tried to as well. But that was a feature of Pan Am. We were an American carrier, and of course we flew to 80 some countries, 120 cities internationally then, and our trademark was certainly well known throughout the world. We did many surveys, and we always came up with a very high recognition rate worldwide.
Let me ask you about the other story of troubled times in the 70s was Vietnam. Between 1970 and 75, Pan Am had I think, fairly profitable contract with the government, ferrying troops and cargo to and from Vietnam. More altruistically, Pan Am also operated rest and recuperation R&R flights for the troops for a week away from the war at almost no cost. I think it was $1 a month.
That's right. It was. That's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So 2 questions. Number 1, I'll ask them separately. Do you think Pan Am's connection to Vietnam hurt its public image in any way?
I'm not sure of that. I don't think so. No, but we did have some harrowing experiences. Early on in the Vietnam War, one of our 747s came out with a bullet hole in it, and we went to the government then and said, "Hey, we had a daily service to Saigon, and we said this is not good. We're a commercial company, and I'm very happy, flying to Saigon, but if our planes have bullet holes, it's a bit of a problem." So we were able to get a law passed that indemnified companies like Pan Am that were providing a service to the U.S. government, that they would then accept responsibility for any of the liabilities for it. So we continued to fly. The other Vietnam problem we had on our round the world service, which didn't stop at Saigon, but we overflew Hanoi from, I guess we were going then from Hong Kong to Bangkok, and we overflew Hanoi. And the North Vietnamese told us we had to stop flying over Hanoi, or they'd try to shoot us down. Of course, we were 40,000 feet, but we weren't too sure that they had any missiles to get that high. But on the other hand, that was not a very good thought. Daily we were exposed to that. So we sent one of our managers in to speak to the North Vietnamese about this and say, "Look, what can we do to help you on this? Because we don't, we can't change our schedule, because it's a round the world flight, and if we had to divert, it would add a couple of hours to our round the world service, which is very tightly scheduled anyhow." So they said, "Well, look, we don't have any airliners, but if you can give us a 707 airplane, for our North Vietnamese airline, that would be happy. That would be good, and we'd let you keep flying over." So we said, "Hey, this is easy," because we had a lot of 707s parked at that point in time. So we flew one in, and taught their pilots how to fly and so forth. So on their first commercial takeoff, they lost an engine on our 747. So they said that we had reneged on the deal, and the deal was off. But we said, "No, we'll give you another 707, all right?" So we flew another one in, and that one worked, and we gave them a replacement engine, so they were happy. But that's a little anecdote about North Vietnamese.
And the U.S. government let you do that?
Yeah, they didn't care. No, it was a commercial airliner, and it didn't have any value as a weapon. So
Okay.
But it solved our problem. We could continue our round the world schedule without interruption.
Okay. Well, the second question about Vietnam was any talk of advertising the R&R flights as a sign of Pan Am's patriotism?
Well, no, because it was, what we recovered there was our cost plus $1. Okay, we wanted no profit, and we flew them out to 3 destinations: Hong Kong, Tokyo, and I think Manila, perhaps, I forget. But that was these were GIs that were just on leave and would fly them back. So they had a week's R&R and wherever they could choose it. And it was very well received and accepted. I think we got a lot of credit for it with the U.S. military. But as you know, I think we were not treated well by our own government, and in the broadest sense. We really got very little support from the State Department and other government agencies. In fact, that was one of our biggest problems, I think, frankly. With
Yeah, and you
I don't want to open up that. That's a whole
yeah, no,
separate subject.
you go into great detail about that in the podcast with the Museum Foundation. Let's talk about sex. The 70s were a time of sensuous and very sexist airline ads, perhaps best remembered in ads by Braniff and National Airlines. Now,
Right.
Pan Am had some of the most beautiful American and international flight attendants in the world, yet Pan Am never went down that advertising road. Why not?
Well, we were much above that type of advertising, frankly, and it, for our status, it would just been totally inappropriate. As you said, we had the best flight attendants because they had to be college graduates or having college. They had to be speak a second language, and they had to be attractive, certain weight condition. Those days, we could have limitations which you could never have today in terms of their weight and size and so forth. I think the most famous thing they did was they had to be weighed every time they reported for duty to make sure they weren't overweight. And so that kept us having a very attractive group of very intelligent, well-spoken flight attendants. And we had no need to, jazz that up in any way. I think we had attractive uniforms for them. We kept the uniforms current, and they were always designed by top designers. And they were chic and current, but they weren't sexy, I would say, to use that term.
Yeah, I think the other reality I heard was that while those ads might have played well in the United States, they would not have played well at all in Hindu, Muslim.
Oh, no doubt about that. Yeah, that was certainly another factor too. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
Let's talk about travel. Let's talk about travel agents, since I was one after Pan Am. Pan Am was a very big promoter of travel agents. At the end of every TV and print ad was the instruction, "See your Pan Am travel agent." I remember when I worked there, Pan Am was very generous to the travel agents. Together with Intercontinental Hotels, there were endless fam trips to international destinations. And when travel agents traveled on their own, they were given free tickets, upgradable to first class. So my question is, how supportive of Pan Am were the travel agents in return, and particularly in the second half of the 70s, when you were competing with foreign flag carriers who were well known for bending the ticketing and tariff rules?
Well, I think we were successful with Pan Am, with the travel agent community in general. That has been a change. I don't want to, take any, super credit here, but when prior to the 70s, Pan Am, I wouldn't say they ignored travel agents, but they really didn't, go after them because you had to pay them commissions. And in those days, the company really didn't need the travel agents that much. But when the 747s came in, we had to really do some serious promoting. So I put a major effort into the travel agents. I attended every ASTA convention. ASTA was the American Society of Travel Agents, and they were the dominant group. And there were other travel agency groups around the world that I would always attend their, their annual conventions. Once in a while, I'll give a speech and so forth. And we developed a very good reputation with them. And but as you inferred, what was happening with the foreign flags, who were really owned by their governments almost exclusively back in the 70s, the foreign flags were owned by their government. They were not private companies that had to make a profit. That's changed in recent years, but back then, because after the war, after World War II, of course, these companies were devastated. They didn't have airlines, they had no tourism and so forth. So when they were able to start entering the market, which would be in the 60s and 70s, they had to pick up from scratch. So they didn't care that much about the rules on fares and so forth. And they were, discounting tickets and stuff of that nature, which was very hurtful for us. But I think we were largely able to overcome that. We, for the reasons I've already cited, we really focused on agents. And again, the real growth in travel in that 747 era beyond, in the 70s and beyond, the growth had to come from discretionary travel. That is non-business travel. The business travel was there, and we got our good share of it because of our service, especially our first-class service and our in-flight dining and so forth. But the growth had to come from the average citizen now, and we could reduce fares because the seat cost of 747 was lower, so we could bring costs down, and we developed tourism out of a lot of countries. For example, the Japanese had never traveled after World War II. Okay, they were just totally isolated, and we put an experiment in out of Tokyo to fly wedding groups down to Guam. The Japanese had a custom then when they would have these massive weddings of maybe 100 couples would get married at once. And so we got onto that, and we started to fly these, and there were charter flights then down to Guam, which was a nice destination. It was nearby and had nice beaches and hotels and stuff, some hotels. And God, it was so successful. We said, oh, let's start flying them to Hawaii. So we did the same thing to Hawaii, a couple flights a day almost to Tokyo, Hawaii, and they were filled. The Japanese suddenly had the wherewithal. And this would have been, in the early 70s. And up to that point, they had not, they were recovering from the war and they had never traveled. So we ended up, you started to see Japanese tourists all over the world. And of course, that's continued. But we did that in more than one country because they were, all these countries, were ravaged during the war, and the population didn't have the means nor the incentive to travel. And when we started promoting that travel to the U.S. from these foreign countries, it really became, very popular. Of course, others copied over time, and then when they developed their own airlines, of course, that was another matter as well. But I'd say we were fairly instrumental in developing the market.
Yeah,
for
no,
some
absolutely.
of the countries to travel abroad.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really
One more question about travel agencies and commissions. 1995, I think, was the year that Delta was the first airline to eliminate ticket commissions. I mean, back-end incentives have always been around. But back in your day, the commission was, I think, 10% of the ticket price, maybe 15% of a group fare. Did you think that the commission model was the right model, or did you consider something different while you were in charge of traffic?
No, we thought about that, of course, and discussed it with many of the, the senior officers of ASTA, which is their organization. And no, that was always a sore point because as I said, the foreign flags would sometimes, offer higher commissions, and So it was always an issue that we had to be careful with. And of course, we had legal constraints because once we published fares and commissions, we had to live with that under US law. And that was, I don't know whether you were aware of this, but we did resign from IATA in the late 70s. I'm not sure what exact year that was, but I'd say 76, around in there. What happened there, and the rationale for that was IATA was founded, IATA, by the way, is International Air Transport Association, which most airlines in those days belonged to and still do, I believe. And then there were about 600 airlines that belonged to IATA. A lot of the smaller countries belonged as well. And the way fares were set is IATA would have fare conventions several times a year where they would then agree on fares on certain routes. And then as a US carrier, we had to file those with our own government, with the CAB, then still existed, as our official fares, once we agreed at the IATA groupings. And so that became the official fares. And under US law, we had to, we had to live with that because that's the way our system works in the US. And however, the foreign flags, and I wouldn't say 100% of them, but many of them, didn't have that, constraint. They figured they could discount those fares or offer special commissions and so forth. And that's when we started to hurt, because that's when there was an overcapacity, as I indicated earlier, of seats. And because every airline, practically any significant airline, had a 747 fleet. And it became very cumbersome to us and hurt our traffic growth. So I went to our chairman and Bill Sill and said, we're going to have to, the only way to, and our legal department, and said, we're going to, this is hurting us badly. We're going to have to resign from IATA. And then we wouldn't be burdened by it, because then we could file fares with whatever we wanted to be approved by our government, and those would be our fares. And we could ignore the antics that were going on within IATA. And that was approved, and I went to a meeting in Nice and was personally there and, submitted our resignation to IATA, which was, people were just totally surprised and shocked. Like, Pan Am founded IATA. I said, yeah, I know we did, but we're being abused by the rules now, and the rules aren't being followed by all of the members of IATA. And that actually worked for us. We had, we didn't need IATA in those days, and we had our own reputation and could set our own fares. That helped a lot. And this happened in, my memory doesn't recall the exact time, but it was in the latter part of the 70s.
Yeah, one last question then. Speaking about marketing tools and brands, Pan Am was famous for building and branding the Pan Am building. That's yes, world famous right now. If you fast forward 50 years or so, public stadiums, like sports stadiums, are now branded by corporations.
Right.
Had Pan Am survived, would you have supported that kind of sponsorship of a major stadium for Pan Am? Do you think it works?
For us, because we were invited to be the airline of Disney World when they opened in Florida, and they wanted a huge fee to do that and so forth. And we analyzed that, and it just didn't work for us because Orlando, Florida wasn't a big destination for us either, in or out.
Right.
And of course Miami was, and Tampa, but I don't know. I'd say these are for us, it would have been a marginal investment. Okay, and we had other better ways to do it, but I can see some of the consumer brands that might, or especially local companies, a bank or some local company that has a
I mean, here in San Francisco, we have the Chase Center. In Miami, I believe the stadium was the American Airlines Stadium, but I think it's been renamed since.
Yes, yeah, there was that happened in some cases, but
In some cases. But
I think it's for an airline that serves the world to have a single stadium named after you is not that significant.
yeah. So, well, Dan, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me today and sharing your history of Pan Am and the marketing and sales department. If you don't mind, I'm going to ask you just a personal note here. You celebrated a birthday this month. So what birthday was
Yes, I celebrated my 92nd birthday. So
your 92nd birthday? God bless you, Mr. Colussy. I got to say, you're a living testament to an affirmation I made to myself when I was hired in 1978 by Pan Am. You know what that affirmation was?
let's hear it. Yes, what?
Join the airlines and you'll live forever.
Well, I don't know whether I would agree with that 100%, but it's certainly a nice thought.
Well, thank you, Dan. You take care now, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Stay well.
Bye-bye.